The blind janitor's son touched the piano and played a piece the famous pianist hadn't finished composing yet, in a grand concert hall echoing with perfection. No one noticed the blind black boy sitting quietly in the shadows, until the world's most celebrated pianist said, half joking, "Wanna try?" What followed silenced the room, because the boy played not from sight, but from something divine. What secret was hiding in his silence? The grand piano at Halberton Conservatory had never sat so still. The room was heavy with silence, the kind that only follows high-stakes performances. Students in crisp tuxedos and glittering gowns had just finished playing their hearts out, their hands still trembling from the pressure of performing in front of him. Maestro Leonard Valen, one of the greatest living pianists in the world. Every note, every phrase, every missed key had been weighed and judged. But off to the side, sitting quietly in the shadows near the back of the hall, was a boy, 10 years old, blind since birth, and nobody important, at least, not in the eyes of the people in that room. His name was Isaiah. He wasn't supposed to be there, but his dad, the janitor, let him sit in sometimes, when it was safe and quiet, because Isaiah loved the sound of the piano, not the fame, not the stage, just the sound. He would sit for hours, memorizing every key by ear. He couldn't see it, but he felt it deeply. That night, while the crowd thinned and Leonard wiped his brow with a silk cloth, he spotted Isaiah seated at the grand Steinway, his small fingers gently resting on the keys. "You play, kid?" Leonard asked, more amused than curious. Isaiah nodded without hesitation. "Sometimes," he said, "but just for fun." Leonard chuckled, not in a mocking way, more like someone entertained by a child's confidence. "Well," he said, "go ahead, just for fun." A few remaining students snickered. A blind kid on that piano. What could he possibly do? Isaiah didn't answer them, didn't flinch. He just took a breath and played. The first notes were soft, searching, like he was feeling his way through a fog. One missed key, then two, and then something shifted. It was like a light turned on, not in the hall, but in him. His fingers moved faster, smoother, like they knew where to go. He wasn't playing scales or anything he'd heard that night. He was playing something else, something real. The melody started to build, rich, warm, aching. And then Leonard froze. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Wait a second. That melody. It was his own unfinished composition. A private lullaby he'd hummed in a rehearsal room once, long ago, when he thought no one else was listening. He had never played it publicly, never recorded it, never even named it. But Isaiah wasn't just copying it. He was completing it. He added colors Leonard had never imagined. He turned pain into peace, longing into light. He transformed a half-written song into something full and breathtaking. The room, once whispering, now stood in silence. You could hear a pin drop. Isaiah's body moved gently with the music. He couldn't see the keys, but he knew them. Not just the notes, but their meaning. When the final chord rang out, Isaiah sat back and smiled. Then he turned his face slightly toward Leonard. "Did I play it right?" Leonard didn't answer at first. He couldn't. He just stood there, stunned. One of the students whispered that it wasn't real, was it? But it was. Every note, every emotion, every second of it. Leonard stepped closer to the piano, his voice hushed. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. Isaiah shrugged, almost shyly. "I don't know. I think I heard it, in a dream." Backstage, Isaiah's father, still holding his mop, stood completely still. He wasn't sure what he was witnessing. His boy, who had never had a lesson, who'd never owned a piano, was now standing center stage, and the entire room was looking at him like he'd just rewritten the sky. Leonard turned to the judges. "Cleared the stage," he said. "But Maestro, the schedule. Forget the schedule. Let him play." Isaiah looked up again. "Yes," Leonard said. "This time, for real." The judges hesitated, confused, but obeyed. Isaiah sat down again. He didn't play Bach, he didn't play Mozart, he didn't play anything written down on a page. He played Isaiah. He played the sounds in his soul, the rhythm of street corners, the hum of rain on windows, the whispers of dreams only he could hear. And for nearly 10 minutes, no one breathed. When he finished, there was silence, not out of awkwardness, but awe. Then the applause came like a wave, one clap, then another, until the whole room erupted. Leonard walked back onto the stage, slowly. "I've toured the world," he said. "I've met child prodigies, geniuses, masters, but tonight I met someone greater, someone who reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." He turned to Isaiah. "Would you let me teach you? In Vienna, you'd study under the best with me." Isaiah looked confused. "I can't afford Vienna," he said softly. Leonard smiled and knelt beside him. "You've already paid more than anyone else ever could. You felt the music. That's the price. The rest, the ticket, the school, the piano, leave that to me." Isaiah's father stepped forward, his eyes wet. "I never thought he was just my boy. He just plays in the kitchen at night." And Leonard looked at him and said something no one ever forgot. "He's not just your boy. He's our miracle." That night, Isaiah walked out the front doors of the conservatory, not the back, not the service hallway. He walked like he belonged, because he did. The world came calling the very next day. Offers, interviews, invitations. But Isaiah stayed grounded, stayed quiet. He still liked playing just for fun. And years later, after concerts, awards, even albums, he returned to Halberton Conservatory, not as a student, not even as a guest, but as Professor Isaiah James. And every time he saw a kid sitting alone in the corner, a little unsure, a little invisible, he'd sit beside them and whisper, "Wanna play, just for fun?" Because he remembered what it felt like to be seen for the very first time. It wasn't perfect at first. Isaiah missed a note, then another. His small hands hovered, unsure, fingers fluttering across the black and white keys like they were reading braille made of sound. People shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. A few students smirked. You could hear the unspoken words in the room. Well, that's what we expected. But then something changed. It was so subtle at first. His shoulders relaxed. His fingers slowed, and then flowed. Like the piano wasn't a puzzle anymore. It was a conversation. Like he had finally found the right words. And suddenly, out of the hesitation, out of the quiet, a melody began to bloom. One note, then two, woven like silk into something delicate, but hauntingly beautiful. The air in the room seemed to shift. It wasn't a song anyone recognized. Not something from a syllabus, not Chopin, not Liszt, but Leonard. Leonard knew it. His eyes narrowed. His breath caught in his throat. It was his melody he had written years ago, when he was alone in a snow-covered studio in Vienna. A lullaby, soft, intimate, unfinished. He had never published it, never played it for anyone, not even his closest students. It had lived only in his mind. And in a quiet, fragile hum he once whispered in solitude, staring out a frost-covered window as snow fell like ashes from the sky. He'd only hummed it aloud once, here in this very hall years ago, during a rehearsal break, when he thought no one was listening. And now, here it was, played by a blind 10-year-old boy who couldn't possibly know it. Leonard's jaw dropped. He didn't move. He couldn't. He just watched as Isaiah's hands shaped raw emotion into sound. The notes came not with precision but with feeling. The kind of feeling you don't learn in lessons. The kind you carry in your bones. Isaiah played like someone who had lived that music, who had walked through its sadness, who had held its longing in his own chest and breathed it back out into the world. He wasn't just copying the melody, he was finishing it, adding to it, folding in chords from old spirituals, gospel harmonies his mother used to sing while washing dishes or brushing his hair, songs full of strength and sorrow, grace and grit, the kind of music that survived storms. The room began to fall silent, not out of awkwardness anymore, but awe. Gone were the snickers, gone were the whispers. Every ear leaned forward, every heart held still. The boy who had no sight was letting them see something bigger than themselves. The lights above shimmered gently, catching the glisten of wet eyes. Even the judge, who had been cold all evening, stiff posture, clipboard in hand, now looked as if he might cry. Leonard took a slow step forward, then another, and as the last note floated into the air, gentle, like a leaf drifting down onto a still pond, he walked to the bench. Isaiah sat, breathing softly, his hands resting like feathers on the keys. Leonard knelt beside him. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at this boy who had somehow found his soul in a song. And then, barely above a whisper, he asked, How do you know that piece?" Isaiah turned his head toward the voice, his expression calm, almost peaceful. And he smiled gently, like someone remembering a dream they didn't want to wake up from. "I don't," he said quietly. "I heard it in a dream." Leonard's breath caught again. In a dream, he almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was something else, something sacred. Backstage, Isaiah's father, still wearing his custodial vest, still holding a mop, had frozen in the hallway. He had known his son had a gift, but this was beyond anything he could understand. He wasn't rich, wasn't educated in music, but he knew what he had just witnessed. He had watched his son, the boy who played on the edge of their kitchen table with his fingers in the air, humming softly, pretending the wood was ivory, sit at the most beautiful piano in the city and make grown men cry. Leonard stood up. He turned to the audience. "This boy," he said, voice shaking, "has just played a piece that does not exist. At least, not on paper, not yet." He paused. "Because it lived inside him first." He faced the judges. "Clear the rest of the evening. I want to hear him again." One of the administrators objected gently. "But Maestro, we have a schedule." "To hell with the schedule," Leonard said. "This is the music we dream of hearing." Isaiah didn't know what to do. He looked up, not at anyone but toward the ceiling, as if listening for permission from somewhere else. Leonard leaned down. "Play again," he whispered. "Whatever's in your heart." Isaiah nodded, and then he played. Not the melody from before. This time, he played something entirely new. It was raw, open, like pages from a diary. He played notes that told stories, of walking home from school, stick tapping on pavement, of nights lying in bed, listening to the rain and wondering what color it was, of his mother's voice humming in the kitchen just before she got sick, of sunlight on his face, of hope. And the audience didn't move. For 10 minutes, no one looked at their phones. No one whispered. The boy who had been born into shadows was now the brightest light in the room. When he finished, he simply let his hands fall to his lap, Silence, not an awkward silence, not an uncertain one. It was reverence. Then came the applause. Not loud at first, just a few claps, then more, until the whole hall erupted. People stood. Some wiped their eyes, a few just stared, stunned. Isaiah looked confused. "Did I do okay?" he asked softly. Lennart nodded, overwhelmed. "You did more than okay." Then he turned to the audience and said, "This is the most extraordinary musician I've ever met. And he has never been taught. He has never seen a single note because he doesn't need to see them, he feels them." Later that evening backstage, Lennart found Isaiah and his father sitting on a bench near the service elevator. "Would you let me teach him?" Lennart asked. The father looked startled. "In Vienna," Lennart added. "At the conservatory. I'll sponsor him personally." The father shook his head slowly, like the words couldn't land. "We can't afford. There's nothing to afford," Lennart said, kneeling down. "I've waited my whole life to hear music like this again. Please let me help him share it." Isaiah turned to his dad. "Can I go?" he whispered. His father hesitated, then nodded. "You can go." They hugged. That moment, that embrace, it was more beautiful than any music because it wasn't just about playing piano. It was about a boy finally being seen. A week later, Isaiah boarded a plane for the first time in his life. He flew across the world to a country he couldn't picture, to a future he couldn't see. But he wasn't afraid. He had already stepped onto a stage no one expected him to belong on, and claimed it without blinking. Years passed. Isaiah played in sold-out halls. He released albums, toured the world, but he never forgot who he was. He sent letters home every week. He asked Lennart endless questions. He prayed before every performance, and he always played something, just for fun. Eventually he came back to Halberton Conservatory. Not as a guest, not even as a performer, but as a professor. And every semester when a shy kid lingered near the piano after class, unsure of themselves, doubting their worth, Isaiah would sit beside them. He'd smile and say, "Go ahead, just for fun." And somewhere far beyond the lights and applause, his mother's melody would hum softly in the back of his mind, wrapping itself around every note. Because he hadn't just learned to play the piano, he had learned how to listen. To music, to dreams, to people. And the world would never sound the same again. That night Lennart didn't play his encore. The world-renowned Maestro, standing before 1,000 expectant faces, simply stepped back from the spotlight. He looked to the edge of the stage, where a small blind boy stood uncertainly. "Isaiah," he said softly, would you come back out here?" The crowd murmured. Some craned their necks to see what was happening. Isaiah took a hesitant step forward, his hand gently sweeping the air until it brushed the edge of the Steinway. He paused. He couldn't see the 1,000 people before him, but he could feel them, the weight of their silence, the pressure of being seen for the first time, truly seen. It was more than stage fright. It was the fear that maybe this wasn't meant for kids like him. But then, he remembered the way his mother used to hold his hand when he was scared. The way music felt when there were no eyes on him, just the notes, and the stillness in between. So he sat, quietly, gently. His fingers found the keys, and then he played. Not to impress, not to prove anything, just to speak. 12 breathtaking minutes. That's how long the world disappeared, and all that remained was the sound of a boy telling his story through black and white keys. He didn't need words. He didn't need sight. His music said everything. Of light, of longing, of a child who never saw the world, but somehow understood it better than most ever would. The auditorium held its breath. No shuffles, no coughs, no applause, even not at first. Just awe. By the final note, people were on their feet. Not out of politeness, but out of reverence. Mothers wiped tears. Musicians looked at each other, unsure of what they'd just witnessed. Lennart, he had tears in his eyes too. Real ones. He turned to the host, leaned in close, and whispered something that would change Isaiah's life forever. Find his father. Give that boy a scholarship, and sign him for Vienna. The host blinked, stunned. "You mean the conservatory?" "Yes," Lennart said, his voice shaking. "That boy's not just gifted, he's called." Backstage, a man in a janitor's uniform stood frozen. His hands, stained with polish and tired from years of unnoticed work, were now trembling. He had heard every note, and now he was crying like a baby. When someone finally found him and told him what Lennart had said, the man just shook his head and whispered, "His mama would have wanted this." Isaiah returned from the stage different, still blind, still small, but somehow shining. The world hadn't just seen him, it had listened. That night a legend wasn't born in perfection, but in truth, a boy, a janitor's son, a child who played just for fun. That left that hall not as a miracle, but as proof that real talent has no rules, only purpose. And sometimes, purpose chooses the least expected among us, to show the rest of us what's truly possible. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Sometimes, the quietest souls carry the loudest miracles. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional human stories that remind you of the power of kindness, unexpected genius, and untold dreams. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one.